I have a Minolta MD 50mm f2 lens here that I'm going to be fully disassembling. This is one of the later Minolta MD lenses and a cheaper lens as well. It came as a kit lens on some of the lower end Minolta cameras. In the construction definitely shows that it was a cheaper lens, but it's not too bad to take apart. It's fairly easy. What I'm going to be doing today is fully disassembling this lens to get access to the diaphragm, aperture blades, and clean, so that those can be cleaned off, and get access to the mechanical components as well, the focusing mechanism, and most of the body sections on their own. Because this is a later MD lens, a lot of the body sections are well integrated together, so you can't really remove all of them and get them on their own to be cleaned as well as possible as you can on some of the earlier MC lenses. To start, I'm going to go in from the front of the lens and get access to the front of the diaphragm. And on the name ring going around up here, there's no marks for a spanning wrench, no divots or anything anywhere for a spanning wrench. So to actually remove this piece, what I did is used a little piece of pipe here with some rolls of gaffer's tape to just kind of give a nice gripping ring to go around here, and that can actually loosen up the name ring here. And on this lens, it's a plastic name ring with both the name ring here and then the inner ring going down here of the front of the lens. And now I have the next ring going around here, the ring that the name ring was screwing into and that filter screw into, this black body section in here. And it has 3 screws going around here, here, and here that are holding it in place. And those are the ones that are on top of the little sections here. The other 3 screws are holding in the next layer of the lens. So I'll undo these 3 and then lift off the black body ring. And now on this next layer of the lens, I have the front optical piece right here. On many of the Minolta lenses, this is actually where the diaphragm mechanism is and the optics are removed separately. But in this lens, the diaphragm and focusing mechanism are one piece and the optics can be removed on their own. So the front optical piece right here is held in place by these 3 screws. So I'll undo these and remove this piece. And now I can just lift off the front optical piece here. It has quite a bit of plastic edging, so this piece cannot be disassembled. So if there is any fungus or anything inside, unfortunately I don't think you can take the optics apart. You can only clean on the 2 surfaces. And now I have access to the front of the diaphragm. So if there's oil or anything just on the front side here, or just a tiny amount, I can go in and clean the front of the diaphragm. But I also want to get access to the back of the diaphragm as well. So I'm going to flip over the lens and start going in from the back of the lens to get access to the back of the diaphragm as well. To get access to the back, first I'm going to remove the mounting plate going around here, this black section that the camera actually mounts to the lens with. So it's held in place by these 4 screws right here. Here's the mounting plate. It has the mechanical couplings and then this little, I guess, brass or copper ring that sits inside here and just kind of provides some padding between the 2 sections. So the mounting plate on the back section right here has the stop-down lever coupler that's actually going into the lens and coupling up with the stop-down lever. And then the aperture control ring is right here on the main lens body, and that's also being coupled to this lever on this side of the lens in the diaphragm mechanism, which is actually controlling the diaphragm. So those 2 are being coupled together, and I'll talk a little bit more about how they're being coupled as I continue taking apart the lens and on the reassembly. But now I just want to remove this back optical piece, and you can actually remove this at the previous stage, but it's just a little bit easier at this stage. You have the back optics here, and this it has a black metal ring going around the top here, and then the back optical piece underneath that. And these are all held in place by the same 3 screws right here. So I'll undo these and then be able to remove that black metal ring and the back optics of the lens as well. Alright, so the metal ring here, and then the back optical piece. Again, it has a lot of the plastic edging holding all the components in place, so probably not something that can be really well cleaned inside the optics themselves, only the 2 external surfaces of them. And now I have access to both sides of the diaphragm, both the front and the back. And because the diaphragm mechanism is integrated into the focusing mechanism here, like on a lot of the later Minolta lenses, this is really, you can probably clean this as well as going further on with the disassembly in this current state. You can further disassemble the diaphragm itself by, on the front section here, removing the 3 screws going around here and lifting off the metal plate. And that actually allows you to clean the individual blades of the diaphragm. But after you do that, you have to reassemble the diaphragm as well. So it's a little bit more involved. And on this lens, that's not something I'm going to do. Continuing on with the disassembly on the back of the lens here, I have the aperture control ring going around here with the aperture control curve over here. And the aperture control ring is just sitting in place here so I can lift it off. There's a little ball bearing on the side right over, let's see where it is. So over on this side here, there's this little ball bearing that was providing the clicking sound as the aperture control ring rotates. And there's also this little lever over here that locks the aperture at f/22, which can also be removed, but I'm going to just keep that on the lens body here. And now looking at the parts of the lens that are remaining, it's mainly the focusing mechanism. And I'm to actually get the diaphragm itself out. As I mentioned, it's coupled with the focusing mechanism. So I'm going to remove both of those pieces, that single large piece that has the diaphragm and the inside of the focusing mechanism here. So the focusing mechanism is being held in place by the 2 bars on either side here, these black metal bars that extend up onto the walls of the inside of the focusing mechanism. And it locks the inside in place so that it focuses up and down when you focus in and out. So to undo this fully, I'm going to remove these 2 bars on either side here and then focus the lens all the way out so that I can just remove the entire piece. Alright, so now I can focus this lens in and out freely. So unscrew the inner section. You can see here that as I was mentioning, the diaphragm and the intersection of the focusing mechanism are completely coupled together on this lens. So this is really as far separate, unless you take apart the diaphragm itself, as you can get these 2 components. And finally, just to finish up with the disassembly of the lens, I'll remove the focusing ring here. It's just is the ring going around on the outside of the focusing mechanism. You actually see and visually grip onto. And it's just is held in place by these 3 screws on the inside here. Once you remove this, you have to zero the lens back to infinity. So loosen up those 3 screws and just remove these 2 sections and separate them. So that has the disassembly of this lens complete. We have the main body sections here, like the focusing ring and aperture control ring, separate from things like the optics, front and back optics, as well as the mechanisms on the inside, so the focusing mechanism and diaphragm as well, and some of the stuff on the back mounting plate that's actually coupling in the stop-down lever and all those components. The reassembly is also pretty straightforward on this lens, and it's not very difficult overall. I'll start with just getting the focusing ring back into a general spot on the lens body, and this will have to be zeroed back. The lens will have to be zeroed back to infinity later, but so for now I just want to get it into a position that's kind of close to where it's going to end up. Reattach these 2 pieces and should be able to slide it between the minimum focusing distance and the maximum focusing distance, so at infinity. And I think in this case it's a little bit closer to infinity, so I'm going to reattach using the 3 screws going around here at closer to the infinity on this side. So I'm going to line up the intersection here so that the 3 screws are going around there and reattach these 2 sections. Next up, I'm going to get the diaphragm mechanism back into the lens, and this, I had removed it so that the post over on this side was kind of closer to the red dot over here, and these two just are going to thread back together to get the inner part of the focusing mechanism back in. It's just as important that when you thread these together, it lines up in the way that it was originally. So I'm just going to screw these back together, and I think this might be the right orientation. On the back section here, I want to look for having these 2 sets of screws on either side here, a little bit in front of these 2 bars or slots on this side of the lens, so that these 2 little bars can come in later and reattach these 2 sections. So I think this is the right orientation on this this section here. And now using these little metal pieces, there's one that has holes in it on this side and one that does not. I'll reattach this piece. The one without holes goes on the right side here, and the top section goes onto the screws, and then the base goes into the little slot down here to reattach those. So I'll start with this one. And this other piece with the open screw holes goes on this other side here, but it's easier to get the screws started first, so I'll just get these started and then slide this in place underneath the 2 screws I just installed. Now the lens should be focusing back and forth between the minimum focusing distance over here and the maximum focusing distance of infinity on this side as well. Now on the back section, I'll reinstall the aperture control ring, and this is going to sit with the aperture control curve, which is the piece right here on the aperture control ring, going through the gap on the main lens body over here. So between there, it's going to sit like this, just slides in place. But there is the little ball bearing which goes into the little pocket right here and is pressed up against the against these grooves in here that I need to install as well. So first I'll get the ball bearing in place on this ring. And now I'll take the aperture control ring here, get this lined up, and just slide that back on, pressing the ball bearing in as it's sliding back on. And when I rotate this back and forth now, I should hear the ball bearing clicking as well. Now I'm going to reinstall the back optical piece and the little black ring, metal ring that was going on top of it, this ring here. So these 2 components. The back optical piece is just going to screw into these 3 screw holes going around here, so I'm going to line that up like that and just sit that on there. And then the black ring here, which is protecting the inside of the lens, is also going to sit on top of this as well, but it has the kind of a cutout in the ring on this side, and that needs to go over by the stop down lever over here so that the stop down lever can still move freely. So I'm going to line both of these up, make sure the stop down lever is not hitting anything, and then reattach this using the 3 long screws that go down into here that attach both of these components together. And finally, on the back section, I'm going to get the mounting plate back in position. On the mounting plate itself, the way the stop down lever and aperture control ring are being coupled into the diaphragm, which is actually controlled by this little post over here on the main lens body, is through this bar. So this black metal kind of crescent shaped bar on the inside here that springs back open when I move the stop down lever on the back side. And the stop down lever directly controls this bar, and then the aperture control ring has this little post over here which goes along the aperture control curve from the aperture control ring, and that also, as it moves along that curve, it opens and closes the but it opens and closes the aperture as well. What's actually doing the coupling is the little pocket over here in this section. So to line this up, I'm going to first ensure that the post is going into the curve here, and then kind of open up the lens using the stop down lever and just rotate this around until I find the position where there are the 4 screw holes on the back that are lining up as well. Alright, so like that, and I'll reattach it using the 4 screws going around the black mounting plate. What I should see on this back section here is that the aperture control ring is directly controlling the aperture, and then the stop down lever can also fully open and close the aperture. Looking back at the front of the lens, I'm going to start the reassembly of the front components as well. First off, I have the front optical piece here, which is just going to sit down on the diaphragm focusing mechanism combined piece. And it has 3 screw holes here that need to get lined up. There are 6 total, but you can use alternating ones just going around to reattach this piece. And the filter ring holder piece, this one right here, is going to go with the screw part that the filters and other things can screw into going up. And it's going to sit so that these three parts right here are in the empty positions, and then this one little notch right down here sits on top of one of these screws that was previously attached. Like that, and I'll reattach it using the 3 screws going around there. And finally, to complete the reassembly of the front section, to screw back in the plastic name ring into the front section here. And I can make sure that everything is working properly, that you can go back and forth between the minimum focusing distance, and it actually stops clearly at that end, and it stops clearly at infinity as well for the focusing. And I can zero the lens back to infinity later. And then also that the aperture control ring is working properly, as well as the stop down lever. Overall, the lens is pretty easy to take apart and repair, although it is a cheaper Minolta lens, so it does use some of the cheaper components, some plastic things. It doesn't have adhesive, which is a positive thing. Some of the later MD lenses use more adhesive than this one does, whereas this one mostly has parts screwed together. And there is some adhesive on the screws themselves in some cases, but it's pretty easy to just break through that. There are a few annoyances like the name ring. Not having any divots for a spanning wrench, so it's a little bit harder to remove than it should be. And some of the pieces are a little more integrated than they are in the earlier MC lenses, like the diaphragm and focusing mechanism being a single piece in this lens. But even with all these limitations, the lens is fairly easy to take apart and repair.